Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are in season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where if you've been listening, you already know this. If you are just joining us for the first time this season, the concept of this season is new to you. It's more wrestling than ever. Some 19, upwards of 20,000 entries, that meaning shows of professional wrestling have been uploaded into the randomizer. Close to 60,000 hours of wrestling are available to be chosen at random for us to watch each and every week. Some things have been very mainstream. Some things have been off the beaten path. We've covered a wide variety of time periods on season 5 of Wrestling at Random. Here, the randomizer chose a show. I can't say exactly when because the YouTube entry doesn't tell us exactly when, but a show, an episode of Championship Wrestling from Florida in 1973, hosted by Gordon Solie. This is prime era Gordon Solie, maybe for the first time here on this podcast, the true prime of Gordon Solie, shepherding us through some Florida wrestling.
Last time we spun the randomizer and it took us to Championship Wrestling from Florida. That was in the early 80s, and it's in your back catalog in this free feed right now. We go through the history. Championship Wrestling from Florida, this being the NWA's Florida territory, of course. And we talk about the history of Championship Wrestling from Florida. So I highly recommend you go back in the archives, listen to that episode. It was so much fun. And it's one of the ones where I learned that Championship Wrestling from Florida is one of my favorite territories from that time period.
Oh, absolutely. Tremendous. It's one that, you and I didn't grow up on.
No.
You don't see as much of it out there. When the randomizer chose this, I was very intrigued. It's 1973 episode because I remember listening to Dave Meltzer talk about spending summers in Florida, I believe, with his grandparents during this time period, 73, 74, 75, and raving about how great Florida was in comparison to a lot of the other territories from this time period.
Yeah, this is I don't know if this is a unique episode for the 70s or if it was a common episode for the 70s, but the structure of this episode is basically they take you around the Florida house show loop and show you a match from a bunch of different areas throughout the state of Florida.
Yeah, it's very cool. And the setup for it is it's in a studio, but this isn't like a studio where the wrestling is happening in the same studio. It's Gordon Solie at a desk with a backdrop behind him, almost with more of like a 60 Minutes or nightly network news vibe in terms of his hosting versus a wrestling show. There's no wrestlers in the studio with him, that he's interviewing. He is hosting. He is taking you in and out of each match.
Yeah, Gordon Solie's at the desk. He's wearing a quick fashion corner trip. He's wearing a turtleneck and a blazer with giant 70s lapels. This is quite the look.
This screams 1973.
We knew exactly the time period just by the clothing. He tells us what we're going to see on this week's show, runs down the list, and then he sends us to an armory in Florida where we join a match in progress. We see Tosh Togo, who we're told played the character Odd Job in the James Bond movie Goldfinger, taking on a young Stan Hansen.
Yes, a young, blonde-haired, big, but very young Stan Hansen. Gordon Solie says that Tosh Togo is the junior heavyweight weightlifting champion. He's very muscular, but my God, he is so much smaller than Stan Hansen. And for me, the story of this match, which we see in clip form, like pretty much everything is on this show, they'll jump from point to point to point within each match, is that it is so weird to see young, big Stan Hansen basically getting dominated and thrown around and beaten down by this small, while muscular, small junior heavyweight.
Yeah, I have no knowledge of Stan Hansen before early 80s Japanese Stan Hansen. Like I don't
the earliest we've seen him was that cage match with Bob Backlund. in the
Sure.
late 70s or early 80s from a
Yeah, that was like
WWF
79
show
or
or
80.
tape.
Yeah.
Yeah, blonde hair, but that's the earliest. This is 6 years prior to that.
Yeah, it was wild. We're 5 minutes in as we join the action. Nothing has happened. Everyone's just kind of feeling each other out. Hansen's got a really cool fighting stance, but Togo just keeps throwing chops and getting the better of him. Stan fights back with an arm wringer, and he's throwing strikes to the shoulder. Hansen hits a huge shoulder block, but another Togo takedown has him down, and then he puts on a stomach claw. Hansen gets to the ropes. We do hear Hansen yelling, "No!" when asked if he quit, so I did know that that was in fact Stan Hansen just by the voice.
Yeah, I was just shocked that he wasn't on the ring apron yelling. That's what we're much more used to.
Togo gets him away from the ropes, puts on the stomach claw again, and gets the submission victory with a stomach claw.
Totally dominated. Stan Hansen was not expecting that. I'll tell you what I was expecting, though. When Tosh Togo threw a chop, I knew what Gordon Solie was going to call it. Called it a judo chop.
Sure did. And we keep the judo theme rolling into our next match.
But like actual judo, and you'll be shocked to know there's no judo chops when we have two men wrestling each other in a judo jacket, a gi match, as it's once again Tosh Togo. After we go back to the desk, Gordon sets it up. It is Tosh Togo in judo jacket taking on Hiro Matsuda, also in judo jacket. Gordon Solie makes a great point talking about that Hiro Matsuda was a former junior heavyweight champion of the world, and he says that he never lost. He just sized out of the weight division.
Yeah, at this point, I'm like, is Championship Wrestling from Florida providing us a curated list of Tosh Togo matches? Is
Yes.
that the episode I'm in for at this point?
Is the disembodied spirit of Gordon Solie an intentionalizer in the bonus feed?
Yes, over at patreon.com/wrestling at random. There we do a bonus episode of this podcast every single week, and we have an intentionalizer tier where you can be the randomizer and choose a show for us to watch. And a lot of times folks do curated lists of matches from a certain wrestler. So that's exactly where my mind went here. Another quick trip to Fashion Corner. They're both wearing a gi top, but no pants. This is a horrible look.
My notes as well say I am disturbed
The worst look.
by what looks particularly in this like 180p broadcast here, substandard definition, as I like to call it. This looks as though it is too naked, except for ye men
Horrible.
getting ready to have a grappling battle, which more power to them, but it's just an odd look for a pro wrestling show.
Matsuda with a trip takes down Togo. After a rope break, Togo with a judo throw. We got a judo throw in a judo jacket match. Togo trying to smother Matsuda with the jacket. Another Matsuda takedown, but a chop and a kick from Togo gives him the advantage. Togo uses Matsuda's belt to choke him. The referee cannot stop this. He cannot break the choke at all. Finally, the ref is able to take the belt away. Togo goes for the stomach claw. But Matsuda is able to roll him up into a small package for the pin.
I'm confused. I did not think in this judo jacket that it was just going to be pro wrestling pins in this judo jacket match that would make it happen. Also, like I was just surprised by how the referee was so completely okay with the blatant gi chokes that we saw throughout this match. This was odd.
Gordon Solie, he's doing commentary for all these matches alone. Like it's just Gordon Solie. There's no color commentary.
And he's doing a tremendous job. Like we always saw, oh man, like Gordon, like early mid 80s, Gordon's great. And then you hear people saying, well, you know, he wasn't even in his prime at that point. He had already lost a little bit of his fastball. Like early to mid 70s is Gordon Solie's prime. And I finally get what people are saying. Like as good as he was in the 80s, and you think of like you'd hear him in the 90s and he sounded like Gordon Solie, but he'd lost a little. Like there's that same level of difference which from him in 73 to him, you know, in the early to mid 80s. He is tremendous. You're bringing that sports announcer credibility and just explaining everything in a way that you totally understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's not just the sports announcer credibility, but it's also the way that it makes it feel like he's pulling up a chair next to you to explain
Yes.
something directly to you. He's not talking to the audience at large. It feels like he's explaining exactly what's happening to you directly. And it's a really that's a very unique skill.
While also still feeling like a professional broadcaster. Because
Yep.
I feel like in modern times, a lot of people who try to do that broadcasting style, it comes across as very unprofessional. But no, in some ways, he reminded me of like some of the best radio talk show hosts. I think I was
Yes.
always I
Yes.
was a big Art Bell fan, and like Art Bell, for all like the craziness, the conspiracy stuff and the UFO stuff, it was just the way when he was doing open lines and taking calls or going through a news story, like you felt like it was this guy that you knew sitting down next to you and telling you a story, even though he also is doing it in the most professional broadcast way.
And he's doing it in a way that's calling the match, but also giving us all of the context we need to
Yes.
parachute in. We always look, okay, if I'm a viewer turning this on for the very first time, how are you catching me up without alienating the people that have been watching every single week? And a masterclass here from Gordon Solie to talk to both the weekly viewer and the new viewer in a way that is extremely satisfying to both.
Yeah, and do so particularly so with explaining things that have happened. A lot of times, like we'll talk, like that happens. Sometimes people do it well, sometimes they do it as well. But either way, a lot of times it feels like that's what's happening. It feels like, okay, they hit the button where they're now going in to explain to you what happened on the last week's show. With Gordon Solie here, it just feels like it's being woven into the conversation
Yes.
that he's having with you, the viewer.
Yes, it's not a dump of exposition to catch
No.
you up. It's explaining in the context of what's happening. It's incredibly difficult when you see people do it badly. You're reminded about how difficult it is and how well Gordon Solie did it here. So tremendous job. So yeah, the headline of this podcast: Gordon Solie, good announcer.
Yes.
He throws us to the Florida heavyweight champion Buddy Colt taking on Johnny Walker. And I'm wondering, is this Johnny Walker Mr. Wrestling 2?
I believe it is. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it is.
A little bit about Buddy Colt. He's the Florida heavyweight champion. February 20th of 1973, Buddy Colt won that title by defeating Jack Briscoe in Tampa, Florida. Here, he's taking on Johnny Walker. And Gordon is explaining to us that Walker wants to injure the arm of Colt because Colt injured the arm of Walker. He broke it twice, apparently. And,
Twice.
And he's working over the arm again. Colt goes right back to the left arm that he broke twice.
And by the way, I'm looking up Johnny Walker to see, and yeah, I'm pretty sure this is right in the transition of going from Mr. Wrestling 2 to being Johnny Walker. Like I'm looking early in the year, like January, he's wrestling in Birmingham, in Chattanooga as Johnny Walker. And then later that, like the next month, he's wrestling as Mr. Wrestling 2.
Okay.
Same thing. I'm looking at Florida here, and yeah, he's wrestling. He's still in Florida, is wrestling as Johnny Walker. I see Buddy Colt and Dusty Rhodes defeat Johnny Walker and Tim Woods.
Johnny Walker and Tim Woods. Here's Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2 right there.
Well, so we might have here. This was the lights out match, correct?
Yes, this is the lights out match.
Okay, so we know the date of at least one match on this show. This was from March 21st, 1973. Buddy Colt, Johnny Walker, NWA Florida title at the Miami Beach Auditorium. So yeah, he's wrestling in Florida still as Johnny Walker, and then he's wrestling in Alabama and Tennessee as Mr. Wrestling 2, by February.
So they're working over each other's arms. Walker picks him up for a shoulder breaker, but Walker collapses, and Colt lands on top of him. Colt goes to the top, hits a knee drop off the top to the back of Walker, and Colt gets the pin. Buddy Colt is your winner.
This threw me. So Johnny Walker's been injured twice by Buddy Colt, taken out. He's back here, and then he just gets his ass kicked and loses in a lights out match with a top rope knee drop. I guess it's also noteworthy that the top rope knee drop here, I assume, as this is an illegal. NWA territory, that would have been a disqualification if this wasn't a lights out match. I guess that's a little bit of face saving here for Johnny Walker.
And apparently Colt was only 1 month into his title reign here. So
there you go. Yeah. We also have, I just wanted to note, Johnny Walker, he does these great short knee lifts. Again, Mr. Wrestling too.
Of course, yeah.
Thigh slaps on knee lifts in 1973 for people who say that, wrestling, it's gone to hell. 50 years ago, they were doing that.
Gordon tells us about the new arena in Atlanta, the Omni.
The Omni Media Building, he calls it. So if you want to know how long ago this show was, the Omni had just opened. It was new. It was akin to the Sphere in Las Vegas in modern times in terms of apparently how big of a deal. He says it's one of the most important sports and media centers in the country, and we'll be going to the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia to see the Masked Medics take on Eddie and Mike Graham. Eddie being obviously a legend in Florida, the promoter of wrestling in Florida, and his son, Mike Graham.
A tremendous Dark Side of the Ring was done on Eddie Graham and Mike Graham. If you have not seen that, go out of your way to watch the Dark Side of the Ring on the Graham family. Absolutely captivating. A very sad story, but very unique characters of the time. Very interesting wrestling story that talks a lot about this territory as well, because like you mentioned, Eddie Graham, the longtime promoter for this area.
And I think this is the first time we've seen Eddie Graham in ring.
For sure.
Here on this podcast. And the first thing I noticed when I saw Eddie Graham in the ring is how much he reminded me physically of Johnny Valentine, the father of Greg the Hammer Valentine, who we've seen Johnny Valentine a few times.
We've loved
podcast.
Johnny Valentine.
Would love to see a lot more. Like Greg the Hammer Valentine, I know you are not a fan at all. Ugh. But he, as a Nepo baby wrestler, is nowhere near as bad as the Eric Watts, David Sammartino's. Like, he's a competent, credible professional wrestler. But having never seen Johnny Valentine wrestle before, when we saw him on this podcast, like, oh my God, Greg got so great. 30% of what Johnny had, even though they physically looked exactly the same. You could, in some ways, make the argument that Eddie and Mike Graham are somewhat similar, at least in star power. I'm so thrown seeing Mike Graham as this like short but like jacked power lifter body here, because I so much more associate Mike Graham with even in the 80s in Florida with some of the stuff we've reviewed, but particularly into the early 90s in WCW, where he's just short and hairy and old looking. Looks like a totally different guy here.
Let's talk a little bit about what the medics look like.
Disgusting. This gear, like, imagine the assassins, Jody Hamilton and whoever his assassin partner was at any given time. Imagine the assassins, but instead of wearing all black bodysuits and black masks as medics, they just wear form-fitting white bodysuits and white masks. This is a horrendous look. I know it's 1973, but still, as you would say, gross.
It was gross. Lots of headlocks. Graham's in control. I liked what I saw. I liked the fire of Eddie Graham. We didn't get a ton of Eddie Graham. I mean, most of this is almost a Mike Graham showcase. He comes in, gets to show off his amateur wrestling skills here,
which are good. Like, the pace for this for 1973, they are moving in a lot of the stuff they're doing here. Like, the action, it's not terrible.
No. They cut off Eddie and double team him in the corner. All four men get in the ring. The Grahams run the medics together. They put on stereo figure four leg locks, and the Grahams get the victory.
Yeah, this was fun. I enjoyed this. Fast pace for the time.
Yep.
I want to see more of Eddie Graham. Gordon Solie said he's known as having the hardest punch in professional wrestling. I'd like to see more of that. It might be a scenario or might be a thing where, his heyday as a wrestler is a time period where we just don't have as much footage as we have of other guys even 5 years later. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing more Eddie Graham.
We get another lights out match. This time, it's your favorite, Adam. Paul Jones, number one. Paul Jones is here. He's taking on a guy who we've seen. We haven't seen a lot of Eddie Graham on this podcast, but boy, have we seen a ton of Dick Murdoch on this podcast, and we get more Dick Murdoch here. Dick Murdoch versus Paul Jones in a lights out match.
So it's Dick Murdoch, 1973. No discernible difference between Dick Murdoch in 1973 physically and Dick Murdoch on Slamboree in 94 or 95 or 93, whichever year that
95,
was.
yeah.
It's crazy. He's definitely moving faster, though. I am uncomfortable with what I'm about to say. Paul Jones as a wrestler here in 1973 in a heated, hated, blood feud lights out match is freaking awesome. Dick Murdoch is incredible, like all his just movements and his selling, just wild gyrations. But Paul Jones as a serious, brutal, violent, hate-filled guy is freaking great in this match. It's cut up, it's clipped, but man, I want to see all of this match. I want to see this feud. These dudes beat the living hell out of each other.
Yeah, Jones comes out wearing cowboy boots. He's got the taped right hand. He's ready to. He's dressed to fight, and Dick Murdoch is just in his regular wrestling gear. So Murdoch is pointing out that Paul Jones has these boots on here. Like we've got trouble already. Jones tries to stomp Murdoch in the head with the boot. He escapes. And he's panicked about nearly getting his head stomped in by this cowboy boot. They start throwing punches, and I loved Murdoch comically selling some of these punches. This was a tremendous start, a ton of heat. It looked like the crowd was going nuts for this, and just a great performance to start the match.
Murdoch is incredible in that, like, I can't think of another guy who can sell comedically, and yet it doesn't take away from the intensity or the violence of the match and what's happening. Just that they're throwing punches, and then they have this like square off where they're both just showing so much fire and rage before they're going at each other. The crowd's at a fever pitch. It's one of those things where you watch modern wrestling, and there's so many things in in-ring modern wrestling that are so much better than early 70s wrestling when it comes to the athleticism, the pacing, the drama, the way you build to things, the finishing sequences. But when you think about, what has wrestling lost? This match to me was just the entirety of it is a display of what wrestling has lost. The hatred, the intensity, the crowd reaction just on punches, just how much these guys looked like they wanted to kill each other and did it in a way where they weren't hurting each other at all, other than when they were blading on the floor so they could bleed. For me, this was just a total masterclass in a style of wrestling that we don't see anymore. Because now, when you do a blood feud and you have something like this, you have to have a million weapons. You can't just have guys' hatred and their fists be the thing telling the story.
Yeah, the only weapon here was Murdoch taking Jones's belt off and choking Paul Jones with it. Jones on the apron, he has the belt. He uses the buckle of the belt to punch Murdoch, busting him open. They're fighting outside the ring. Murdoch punches the ref. Jones is bleeding also. The match is stopped. Dudes hit the ring to try to separate them. Obviously, this feud must continue, and I'd like to see more of it myself.
Yeah, it's a lights out match that got stopped, that's always a little bit weird. But I guess when multiple refs have been knocked out and you just can't stop the guys from fighting, there's nothing else you can do. But I mean, the end of this, they're bloody. They're like caged animals. They're feral in terms of their hatred for each other. It's again, like, it's just something you don't see in modern wrestling. And for me, it was such a breath of fresh air to watch something like this with obviously Dick Murdoch, a master, but Paul Jones more than holding his own here in 1973.
think about how different Paul Jones looks from 73 to 83, and then think about how Dick Murdoch looks exactly the same his entire life. Like, I don't think
not only from 73 to 83, but from 73 to 95.
to 95.
It's a great point. We talk about wrestlers that age and then wrestlers that don't, or wrestling figures. Obviously, J.J. Dillon is, it's kind of the standard bearer for that, but Dick Murdoch as well. And yeah, Paul Jones here is barely even discernible as the same guy that would be managing, B teams in the NWA and on Crockett Television in the late 80s.
We go back to the ring for a 19-man battle royal.
I always love on these old territory shows the random, like, it's a 12-man battle royal, it's a 19-man battle royal, it's an 8-man battle royal. Well, all 8 guys already had a match at the beginning of the show. Always cracks me up. Also, I always love the random amounts of money that are on the line. Here it is. 6,012 American dollars are the purse here for this. Some territories, they go way overboard and say, oh, there's $100,000 on the line for this battle royal, or, it's a $50,000 fine. Or I think of like Late Edge Continental in 1989, or it was like a $800 battle royal.
$800 and maybe a fur coat.
A fur coat, which is worth a mink coat, which is worth 3 times that. But yeah, here $6,012. I'm disappointed they did not give us like 23 cents as well, just to fully complete the vibe.
So there's a bunch of unnamed men being eliminated. I can't make out any of these people.
And neither can Gordon Solie. It is nameless, faceless men until we see not Rob Fuller, not Colonel Rob Parker, but his brother, Ron Fuller. The story here is apparently Ron Fuller feuding with the Samoans, who are managed by a guy named Dandy Jack. Ron Fuller, we talked about intensity and fire in the previous match with Dick Murdoch and Paul Jones. This is an almost uncomfortable, like inhuman level of intensity from Ron Fuller here. It's the only way I can describe it.
No, and I'm not used to saying Ron Fuller superstar, but this guy hit the ring and like he was going nuts. This was crazy. I'm not used to this Fuller being the guy.
No, and he's tall, he's lanky, he's wiry, and he is just incensed and
he's tossing dudes.
He's tossing dudes, moving a million miles an hour, but in a way that just has so much intensity and intent behind it. I need to see more of this 1973 Ron Fuller. He is incredible.
We're told Gorgeous George is in the Battle Royal, and I see this blonde-haired guy in the ring, and I'm like, oh, is this a first Gorgeous George appearance on the pod? And I'm like, wait, didn't he die before the 70s? Like, he wasn't alive in the 70s, right? And so I had to go to Wikipedia.
This was not, to confirm, Gorgeous George from late 90s WCW, no, Randy Savage's girlfriend.
No, it is not. So I looked it up. The OG Gorgeous George died in 1963. The one from like the 50s television, the pioneer, the first big star of television wrestling, Gorgeous George. That guy died in 63. I didn't think he survived into the 70s. I was correct. This guy is Gorgeous George Jr., who was Charles Richard Phelps. He legally changed his name to George Raymond Wagner, the same name as the original Gorgeous George, trying to get over that he was, in fact, the son of the original Gorgeous George.
He, by the way, in case you were looking for more information, you don't even have to go to Wikipedia. You can dive deeper and go to Pensapedia, the Pensacola, Florida specific version of Wikipedia, which is where I found my notes on Gorgeous George Jr.
I also went a little bit further. This is Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer newsletter. Because of being able to document the name, he fooled a lot of people into believing he was not just using the name as a gimmick. However, when he came to Los Angeles in the 70s, He was sued by Betty Wagner, the first wife of the original Gorgeous George. And she was the woman who actually represented the original Gorgeous George at the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony in 2010. She sees him on television, and she sues him.
Yeah.
The lawsuit prevented him from using the name Gorgeous George in California. So he was known as the Gorgeous One when he wrestled in California. He continued to use the name Gorgeous George Jr. outside of California for the rest of his career.
Man, that's got like big WCW, the boss, big boss man, guardian angel vibes to it.
So Ron Fuller's running wild, tossing dudes out of this battle royal. Tim Woods is eliminated. A Samoan gets tossed. Fuller's destroying another Samoan. Dandy Jack, the manager, accidentally hits his own man. Fuller dumps that Samoan. And as he does, Gorgeous George reappears. And he hits Fuller with a high knee to the back, dumps Fuller to win the Battle Royal. So this was a Battle Royal finish in 1973, and I swear we still get it in modern times today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was a Jerry Lawler Battle Royal finish. We've seen this countless times. Like you said, even into modern days. I feel like there was an AEW Battle Royal where MJF did something like this, maybe one of the Dynamite Diamond Ring Battle Royals. I guess if it works, it works. For me, though, again, like this random, I guess not random, this other Gorgeous George, certainly a fascinating story, but seeing Ron Fuller here,
yes,
just
he's
as
the story.
a wild man, like that to me, my takeaway so far in this show is the physical intensity in Florida in 1973 was off the charts. When you look at Ron Fuller here, and then Paul Jones and Dick Murdoch in the previous match, like that is a stark difference from this same time period in New York with the WWF, where we've been subjected to several shows, including the Madison Square Garden show from 1974, where there sure as hell was nothing like this leaping off the screen.
No, and remember, this is the house show loop. So
Yes.
we're seeing matches from a bunch of so these are the payoff matches. There was no pay-per-view. There was no build to a the big shows were at the arena. And so the TVs were leading up to this. I can only imagine how, based on, just the ones we've seen in the 80s, I can only imagine that the 70s, if this is the payoff, the build must have been off the charts because the people are in it and the guys are committed to it, and it is a big deal. Would have loved to have seen the build on this. We need more Florida Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, I don't know how much weekly TV there is of Florida from 1973. I assume not a ton. Again, when you go to find the show on YouTube, it's just Championship Wrestling from Florida 1973, as if there aren't other ones from 73.
Yeah, a lot of the TV shows of the 60s and 70s were taped on film, and so it was expensive, so they would tape over them and continue to reuse the film. So there's plenty of territories that don't have a lot of footage from that time period.
And wrestlers that are sort of thought as historical footnotes, that if they were in territories or time periods that the footage survived, they might be mentioned, in the same breath as a Nick Bockwinkel, for example.
The British Isles champion, Tony Charles, taking on Big Jim Brooks. The story of this match is Tony Charles is going to use his speed to win this match. He's working on an arm, switches to working on a leg. Brooks kicks him off. Charles off the rope, spins away, turns it into a cradle, gets the quick pin.
Yeah, this was short. It was fun. I thought Gordon Solie was particularly good here, kind of setting the stage for the style we were going to see, saying how Tony Charles has an amazing and unique capacity to throw his opponent while keeping a hold on at the same time. Tony Charles with a great flying jackknife hold to get the pin. Jim Brooks, by the way, disgusting looking professional wrestler.
Oh, love it. Love this is what you want from just a gross jobber plus here.
Yeah, just short, horrible, pot belly,
bad hair.
hairy.
Yeah.
terrible Ron Jeremy level skullet. We are told, I don't know if it's shoot or not, but we're told by Gordon Solie that he is the cousin of Dick Murdoch.
That tracks. I'd believe it. Um, we are told about the University of Tampa's wrestling team. They're supposed to be good this year.
Gordon Solie is excited. He had a great talk with Tampa wrestling coach Joe Wendell. He then says, we're now going to see a real amateur legend who's made his way to the pros and is a legend, Jack Briscoe, taking on the king of wrestling, Bobby Shane, for the Florida TV title at the Bayfront Center in St. Petersburg, Florida, which, because my brain doesn't retain things that are important in my life, but retains things about wrestling, I recall that the Bayfront Center in St. Petersburg, Florida, was the home of the first WCW Super Brawl, headlined by Ric Flair versus Tatsumi Fujinami for the world title, and that great Steiners versus Sting and Lex Luger match. That's one of the best matches in the history of WCW.
A backbreaker from Briscoe, goes for the figure four, but Shane counters it a few times. Shane uses his knee brace to hit Briscoe in the head with a couple of knee shots.
These are awesome. It's like he swings his knee out to the side and clips him with the knee brace over and over. This is something that a heel that wears a knee brace needs to bring back at some point. Just tremendous stuff. I also liked whoever this was. I don't know if this was Eddie Graham or whoever it was on commentary with Gordon Solie during this match is going on and on about something in the anatomy called the crazy bone, which I assume is the funny bone, your elbow when you hit it wrong. Maybe there's something else, another bone that's crazy, but I got a kick out of that.
Jack Briscoe wins with a quick roll-up. I didn't get enough of this match. I needed more of this match on this TV show because we love Jack Briscoe here. We talk about guys we didn't know we liked until we started doing this podcast. Jack Briscoe is one of those guys. I just always chalked up as like, boring 70s wrestler. I don't know much about him. Through the matches we've seen on this podcast, definitely right up there on the Mount Rushmore of guys I didn't know I liked until I watched them on this podcast.
For sure, athletically, he cuts through a lot of the sort of sameness of the 70s we've described, so much of the slow action, the punch, kick, choke, stalling. That is not Jack Briscoe. He's a guy who, while the style he wrestled was decidedly of its time, when you see him, you can project in your mind what type of wrestler this guy would have been if he was around in modern times. He would have been a state-of-the-art wrestler regardless of whenever he was around and what the state of the art was at that time.
And you always heard that he was a great wrestler, and you never heard about his personality, but his personality is fantastic as a white meat babyface, or when he's doing a heel shtick with his brother and other stuff. Like, he's always wildly entertaining, Jack Briscoe.
100%. He does some cool stuff in this match. A great standing drop kick. He does that Tatsumi Fujinami style backbreaker, Billy Robinson style backbreaker, which is very different, particularly for 70s wrestling in the United States. And he gets the win with an Oklahoma roll, sort of a basic version of like the Sonata style Japanese rolling leg clutch hold. Love me some Jack Briscoe.
Now, this was a great way to end the show. Gordon recaps all the things we've seen. And, I wish I could see it again next week, Gordon.
It's great. He ends the show by saying, we hope you enjoyed our tour throughout the Southeast. And I just stood up out of my couch and said, yes, Gordon, I enjoyed this tour. Thank you for taking us on it. The only thing I was disappointed about was that Gordon hyped a special announcement at the start of the show. We never got that special announcement. I want to know what Gordon Solie and Florida Wrestling had cooking for us.
Favorite thing on this show for you?
Gordon Solie being prime Gordon Solie, first and foremost. But I would say maybe even beyond that, it's the intensity that we saw, the violence that we saw in the Dick Murdoch Paul Jones match, and then seeing a level beyond that from Ron Fuller of all people in that 19-man $6,012 battle royal.
Yeah, never did I think I'd say one of the best things on a show would be Paul Jones. Note the time.
You didn't me. He's my Craig Valentine.
But yeah, definitely for me also beyond Gordon Solie, honorable mention to Ron Fuller's performance. Worst thing on this show for you?
Oh God, I don't know what was the. I mean, maybe fake gorgeous George, just because I got excited for a second,
So,
thinking that we were going to see real gorgeous George. I would say the look of uh
the judo
of
match?
of Big Jim Brooks and the judo match. The look of the judo match. I would say maybe the judo match because the pin was just weird.
Yes.
Um, it was. I'd say the most like disconcerting thing, other than the judo jacket gear, was just seeing Stan Hansen getting his ass beat and selling for a guy like 1/3 of his size is not something I ever expected I'd see.
No, that I'd say yeah, that I think we just have to go with some of the looks as the worst
Yes.
thing because everything else was great, and I'd say just calling out that we didn't get enough of the good things we wanted to see, but that's of course by design. They want you to go to the arena to see it, but as a viewer, I wanted more of the good stuff.
Yeah.
Cut one of the Togo matches and give me
Yes.
more of one of these other matches, please.
Yeah. Give me more Jack Briscoe. Give me more of Murdoch and Paul Jones.
So, with that, we're going to wrap up this week's episode. Make sure you're following us on all of the social media platforms. That's where you'll see the GIF for what's coming up the week after. What's the GIF for this show, Adam? What are you going to put up there?
The GIF is just Gordon Solie
Good.
being Gordon Solie because honestly, the video quality is bad enough for 1973 YouTube many generations later upload that it probably wouldn't look that great in a GIF if I tried to do that. So it's just Gordon Solie doing Gordon Solie things.
Agreed. So make sure you're following us at Wrestle at Random on all of the social media platforms: X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. We're everywhere at Wrestle at Random. You can also support the show by going to our YouTube channel. If you don't consume your podcasts only via audio, you want to see the video version, you can go search Wrestling at Random Podcast on YouTube, and we need a like, subscribe, all those things. That helps us work the algorithm so other wrestling fans can find the show. So even if
Definitely.
you only want to hear it on the audio version, just go throw us a subscribe anyway. Helps us out.
You got to follow on the YouTube version. We always talk about Fashion Corner for the wrestlers. One of the draws, if you can call it that, not seeing my face. No one wants that. But the Fashion Corner for me, I am always wearing a shirt that usually has some relation to this week's show. However, I did not have a Big Jim Brooks shirt. I did not have an Odd Job shirt from 007. So instead, I'm wearing a cool vintage inspired Sting shirt that I just acquired.
So make sure you're following us there. And if you want to support the show via our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling at random, that's where we do an extra show every single week. We do bonus episodes that you cannot hear on the free feed. That's over at the bonus feed. We're over 160 plus episodes over there that you unlock with your $5. It will unlock the entire back catalog of the podcast, an additional 160 episodes. So head over there to support the show. You can also choose to be the randomizer. Pick a show for us to watch and do that over there. All the information is at patreon.com/wrestling at random. The entire back catalog. Yeah.
We should make sure people understand as we get towards the end of season 5 here, as we round towards the end of season 5, on the bonus feed, shows never stop. When we take a break, sometimes it's a month or two, sometimes it's 3 or 4 months on the free feed. On the bonus feed, even in those season breaks, brand new exclusive episodes for our patrons, for our supporters.
That's right. And don't forget, you've got the entire back catalog of this podcast. We're seeing the new listeners coming on. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for supporting us and joining us here. The entire back catalog of this podcast is all evergreen content. You don't have to be sad that you missed us recap Championship Wrestling from Florida from the 80s. It's in the back catalog right now. You can go listen to it. It's new to you. It's like it came out this week.
The ultimate road trip radio, I like to say our podcast is. If you are traversing the country, maybe you're taking a transcontinental flight, there are hundreds upon hundreds of hours of shows that are as new to you as this one if you've never heard them before.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're calling it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. And thank you, Gordon Solie. Yet again, I will say, yes, Gordon, we enjoyed the tour throughout the Southeast that you took us on.
We sure did. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.